The morning sun stretched across the horizon, bathing the chapel in golden brilliance. As Amelia stood before the mirror in her wedding gown, the delicate lace tracing her shoulders like threads of destiny, her heart pounding with a rhythm that echoed. Both joy and anticipation for this was the day she had dreamed of since she was a little girl, imagining the promise of love and the sanctity of forever. Yet even as the bells began their gentle chime, there was a strange chill in the air, a weight, pressing against the calm that no one else seemed to notice, but lingered at the edge of her mind. The guests filled the pews with laughter and whispers of admiration, their eyes fixed upon the radiant bride and the solemn groom, though only Daniel felt the truth behind the moment his tuxedo crisped his tie, knotted with military precision, and his gaze ever shifting, scanning the crowd as if every smile could be a mask. Hiding an enemy, he carried himself with the calm of a soldier in hostile terrain, though none of the wedding party had reason to question his composure, and only Amelia believed his silence meant nervousness, not a battle. Readiness honed over years of shadows and secrets. The choir began its hymn, and the organ surged with the solemn music of matrimony. But just as Amelia placed her hand upon her father's arm to walk the aisle, Daniel shifted subtly, his eyes flicking to the stained glass windows behind the altar, where faint reflections betrayed the presence of shapes moving outside, too organized to be late guests, too controlled to be wandering strangers. And as his fingers brushed the ring box in his pocket, his jaw tightened with the knowledge that time was bleeding faster than the ceremony itself. The crowd rose to their feet as Amelia stepped into the aisle, the train of her gown sweeping across polished wood, while her father whispered soft encouragement. Yet even in her dreamlike haze, her eyes caught a detail that unsettled her. In the far corner sat three men in dark suits, their posture unnaturally stiff, their eyes scanning not the beauty of the bride, but the exits and corners of the chapel, as though they were plotting routes. Their hands close to their jackets, as though gripping something unseen, and the moment passed like a shadow, but the unease lingered like a knot in her chest. Every step forward carried Amelia toward Daniel, yet also deeper into the storm that brewed just beyond the chapel walls, where in narrow alleys, unmarked vehicles idled with engines silent, and men in black tactical gear waited with the patience of wolves for a signal. The plan was simple: enter, strike, extract, and erase, but none of them accounted for the fact that Daniel was already watching, already prepared for the breach that would come like thunder through the sacred ceremony. The priest raised his voice, reciting the age-old words that bound souls together, as Daniel looked at Amelia with a softness that masked the steel beneath. His gaze, his lips forming the promise of forever, but inside his mind, calculations spun exits, doors, structural weaknesses, times to breach and fallback, coordinates his training, whispering that this was not a wedding. This was a battlefield disguised in flowers and music, and the world would soon see how thin the line between peace and chaos could be. Guests leaned forward, smiling, some wiping tears as if they were witnessing pure romance, yet none of them noticed the faint shimmer in the bouquet. Amelia carried a transmitter hidden among roses and lilies, its signal pulsing silently into the sky, calling to satellites that had slumbered in low orbit waiting for activation. And as Daniel's vow ended, the pulse completed its sequence, sending a message across secure frequencies, a single code that meant the end of normalcy and the awakening of Ghost Protocol. The air grew heavier. As Amelia approached the altar, her heart trembling with joy at the sight of her groom, though she could not explain the strange tightening in his hand when he reached for hers, nor the way his eyes lingered on every corner of the chapel as though danger lived in the very shadows between the candles and the hymn books. Her father kissed her cheek, stepped aside, and she took Daniel's hand, believing she was stepping into forever, while Daniel knew they were stepping into fire. From the street outside, a crow circled overhead, its wings casting fleeting shadows across the stained glass, yet to trained eyes. It was no bird at all, but a drone, small and silent, relaying visuals to operatives hidden blocks away. Their voices crackled through comms lines, confirming positions, noting the readiness of the assault, each syllable spoken with the detached calm of men who had done this before, unaware that their target was already aware of them and had laid his own foundation long before they arrived. Within the chapel, the priest continued his words, oblivious to the tremor that vibrated faintly beneath. The floorboards, as though machinery stirred below the surface, Daniel's hand slipped beneath the altar, pressing against a seemingly innocent groove that clicked beneath his touch, a hidden switch sending a ripple of energy through the building. Doors, sealing circuits, engaging safeties, disengaging. Amelia never noticed her eyes fixed only upon the man she loved, though deep within her the faintest thread of doubt began to coil, whispering that not everything was what it seemed. Laughter bubbled. From the pews, as a child dropped a flower petal, and a grandmother dabbed her eyes. Yet amid the warmth, Amelia's maid of honor glanced again toward the men in dark suits, her breath catching as she realized they had not smiled once, nor moved with the rhythm of the ceremony, their stillness too perfect, their eyes darting not to the bride, but to each other, as though counting down to something unseen. And as her mouth opened to speak, a sharp vibration hummed in the stained glass windows, rattling their frames for just a moment. The tension climbed, though only Daniel seemed attuned to its full gravity, his heart calm, his breath measured as if every beat was preparing for the inevitable breach. He tightened his grip upon Amelia's hand, whispering words of love that to her felt like reassurance. Yet in truth were coded reminders to himself that he was ready, and as the priest asked if anyone had reason to object, the silence stretched not with romance, but with danger, the chapel holding its breath in the fragile balance before the storm. The organs swelled in grandeur, and the guests sighed in contentment. But beyond the doors, boots struck pavement in unison, approaching with deadly synchronization. Helmets reflecting the sunlight, weapons hidden beneath unmarked coats, their timing precise, their orders absolute. Yet within the chapel, where sacred vows echoed, the first veil of ghost protocol had already dropped, and the stage was set for a collision that would turn the dream wedding into an extraction written in fire and shadow. And in that suspended instant, as Amelia gazed at Daniel, believing the world was hers to hold, she failed to notice the faint red dot of a laser sight trembling against the far wall, nor the subtle vibration in the floor that grew stronger with each passing second, until it became clear that the ceremony was not leading toward vows, but toward chaos, waiting for the very next breath to unleash itself upon the unsuspecting crowd. The priest raised his hand to bless the union, his voice calm and steady. Yet Daniel heard something beneath it, the faint crackle of a comms line intercepting on his hidden earpiece, a whisper coded and urgent, confirming that Ghost Protocol had awakened the bouquet in. Amelia's hands pulsed faintly, the transmitter humming a signal so subtle that no one else could sense it. But for Daniel, it was the sound of the world shifting from peace to war. Amelia smiled, believing the tremor in her groom's hand was nothing more than nerves, her heart soft and full as she prepared to speak her vows. But Daniel's eyes never left the corners of the chapel, every shadow, every doorway, every movement calculated and logged, his soldier instincts sharper than ever. He leaned forward, brushing her hand with reassurance, but in the subtle press of his palm, he activated another switch hidden beneath his sleeve, a coded trigger that sealed the outer doors of the chapel with reinforced locks. The crowd clapped softly at the tender exchange, though they could not see the layers of machinery coming alive beneath their feet. Gears whirring, circuits lighting, panels glowing faintly in corridors meant never to be discovered. The chapel itself was more than a sacred place. It was a fortress built years earlier under false pretenses. Daniel had chosen this exact venue not for beauty, but for survival. It was a sanctuary wired for escape and defense, a trap laid long before the day arrived. Outside, the men in dark suits shifted, their weight-tapping earpieces, confirming that all entrances were secured. The lead operative nodded to his team. The breach would begin in seconds. Their orders were precise. Capture the asset, erase the witnesses, leave nothing behind. And as they began their synchronized approach, the chapel doors trembled faintly under the force of their steps, though the music of the organ still echoed loudly enough to disguise the threat for a moment longer. Amelia turned to Daniel, her lips forming the first words of her vow. Yet even as the syllables left her mouth, Daniel leaned closer, his breath against her ear, whispering words no bride expected to hear. "Today we run. Now." She blinked in shock, not comprehending his meaning, her voice faltering, her bouquet trembling in her hands as her mind struggled to connect the warmth of the wedding with the sudden cold edge of his tone. Then the first impact struck the chapel doors, a deep echoing boom that silenced the music and froze the guests. In stunned confusion, their eyes darting to the sound, while Daniel tightened his grip on Amelia's hand, pulling her back behind the altar, the priest cried out in alarm, demanding to know what was happening, but before anyone could answer, a second impact split the wood and metal shards scattered across the aisle. Smoke filled the air, curling through the stained glass windows that shattered into 1,000 colorful shards raining upon the pews. The guests screamed in panic, diving beneath benches as tactical figures stormed into the sacred hall, their movements precise, their weapons raised, their voices sharp with commands that no one understood. Daniel pressed Amelia low behind the altar, his body shielding hers, his mind racing through every contingency prepared long before this moment. Amelia's eyes widened with terror. Yet what stunned her more than the intruders was the expression on Daniel's face. It was not surprise. It was grim resolve, as though he had always known this day would come. She grabbed his arm, demanding answers, but he gave none, only sliding his hand across the polished floor to a hidden panel that clicked open, revealing a steel handle. He pulled hard, and the altar shifted aside with a groan, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into shadows. Bullets tore through hymn books and shattered candles as Daniel dragged Amelia toward the opening, the men in black shouting for targets to be secured, the crowd scattering in panic. But Daniel moved with impossible speed, guiding her into the stairwell, slamming the altar back into place above them, sealing off the chaos behind, though the echoes of gunfire still roared. Through the stone walls, the stairwell descended, deep underground lights flickering to life one by one, illuminating narrow steel corridors. Amelia stumbled, her gown catching against sharp edges, her tears mixing with fear and disbelief. She demanded to know who Daniel truly was, what was happening, what Ghost Protocol even meant. But his only answer was silence. His jaw clenched, his focus fixed on the path ahead, his eyes scanning even in the safety of the hidden halls. Above ground, the operatives spread through the chapel, confirming that their targets had vanished. Their leader cursed into his comms, demanding drones to scan for underground passages. The mission was no longer simple. It was compromised, and that meant Ghost Protocol had not only been triggered, it had been anticipated, which terrified the men more than the firefight itself, for it meant they were not hunters, but prey. In a larger game, they could not see. Amelia staggered as Daniel pressed his hand against a retinal scanner. Hidden in the wall, a door hissed open, revealing a chamber lined with screens and weapons racks. Glowing maps of satellite trajectories flickered across the walls, and Amelia realized with horror that this was not a wedding chapel at all. It was a command center buried beneath the earth. Daniel moved swiftly, pulling open drawers, stuffing gear into a pack, weapons, ammunition, communication devices, all arranged with precision. He turned to her, eyes burning with urgency, and said the wedding was never real. It was the cover. Her heart shattered, not from the explosions above, but from the truth in his voice. She had loved him, believed in him, trusted the softness he showed her, and now that softness had been revealed as a mask for something deeper, something darker. She wanted to scream, demand answers, but before she could, the chamber lights flickered. Red alarms blaring as the system detected breaches above. Daniel grabbed her hand, pulling her through another door deeper into the tunnels. The ground shaking as detonations ripped through the floors above. Every step deeper into the earth carried Amelia further from the world. She knew the roses and music and laughter already feeling like memories from another life. The echoes of gunfire above still haunted her ears, and the pounding of her heart drowned out all thought. She stumbled, but Daniel held her upright, whispering that survival was the only truth, now that answers would come later, if they lived long enough to reach them behind. Them, the operatives, swarmed through the chapel, descending into the stairwells, their night vision cutting through darkness, their weapons ready. But the tunnels twisted like a maze, doors sealed behind Daniel and Amelia, every corridor a trap designed. To slow the hunters, the Ghost Protocol was not merely defense. It was deception. Layers of false passages, collapsible ceilings and dead ends, each one pulling the intruders deeper into confusion. Amelia gasped for breath as they rounded another corner. Her gown torn, her veil lost, her tears falling freely. Yet still she ran her love for Daniel, warring against the betrayal she felt. And in her chest, a single question screamed louder than the alarms: was she his partner or his prisoner? Her heart begged for truth, even as her body followed him deeper into the shadows of a mission she had never known she was part of. And as Daniel opened yet another steel door into a chamber where a humming engine roared to life, Amelia froze in the doorway, staring at the vast machine before her, a transport unlike anything she had ever seen, suspended above rails, ready to launch into the abyss of the underground world. Daniel turned to her, his eyes filled with both love and regret, whispering that once they stepped inside, there was no turning back, and that beyond this threshold, the wedding would be over forever, replaced by war. The chamber pulsed with red emergency lights as the engine before them roared alive, its metallic body gleaming, with the sheen of a machine built not for beauty but for survival. Amelia stood frozen at the threshold, her gown torn, her hands trembling, her chest heaving with confusion. She wanted to step back, to close her eyes, and wake to the dream she had prepared for all her life. A dream of vows and laughter, yet the fire in Daniel's eyes told her the dream had already been burned away by something far greater. Daniel pulled her forward, urgency carved into every line of his face, his voice low, but firm as he explained that the machine before them was a rail transport designed to carry them through a hidden network spanning beneath the city, a network few even knew existed. Amelia resisted, her voice cracking as she asked him again who he really was, why he had deceived her, why her wedding had become a battlefield. But Daniel did not answer with words. Instead, he opened the transport door and guided her inside, his silence louder than anything he could have spoken. The interior smelled of oil and steel. The seats bolted tightly to the walls, the hum of power vibrating through the floor as Daniel pressed his hand against another biometric scanner, the console lighting up with maps of branching tunnels flashing red where breaches were detected. The system confirmed. Ghost Protocol was active, meaning every safe house, every fallback point, every piece of Daniel's secret world was unraveling. Amelia watched with wide eyes, realizing she had stepped into a life built on lies, layered in shadows, and sealed with secrets. Above ground, the operatives descended into the chapel tunnels, their boots echoing like thunder against the metal floors, their weapons raised, their voices clipped and urgent as they confirmed Daniel's escape route. Yet every passage led them deeper into confusion. Doors sealed behind them, Corridors collapsed suddenly with explosive charges built into the walls, the maze designed to delay and devour intruders, yet still they pressed on, determined to capture. The asset, their orders ringing in their ears, failure was not an option. The transport shuddered as it surged forward into the tunnel rails, sparking beneath its weight. Amelia gripped the seat, her body trembling with fear as the darkness of the underground swallowed them whole. Daniel remained calm, his eyes locked upon the glowing maps, his hand steady upon the controls, his mind calculating every possibility, every threat. She stared at him with a mixture of love and fury, demanding to know if she had ever truly known him at all. His silence weighed heavy upon her soul like chains she could not break. Explosions echoed faintly through the tunnels behind them, vibrations rattling the walls, the operatives pursuing in smaller crafts designed for rapid descent. Their headlights piercing the black like predator eyes. Amelia gasped at the sight through the rear window, small shadows moving swiftly closing the distance. Daniel adjusted the controls, the transport lurching as it switched rails, diving into deeper passages designed to lose their hunters, the tunnel walls whipping past in blurs of concrete and steel. The deeper they went, the more the air grew heavy. The tunnel's older, less maintained water dripping from cracked pipes. Steam, hissing from unseen valves, the atmosphere pressing like a weight upon Amelia's chest. She clutched the armrest, struggling to breathe as she demanded the truth. Daniel finally turned his eyes soft for a fleeting moment as he whispered that everything he had done, every lie, every mask, was to protect her, to keep her safe from the world that now hunted them. His words a balm and a wound at the same time. The transport jolted violently as gunfire erupted behind them, bullets striking sparks against the steel. Daniel cursed under his breath, pulling a lever that triggered charges along the rail, the tunnel collapsing behind them in a roar of fire and dust, sealing off their pursuers. Yet the victory was temporary, the maps still glowing with red. Markers, operatives deploying from multiple entry points, closing in from every direction. Amelia pressed her hands to her ears, tears streaming as the reality of her new world crashed over her. She was no longer a bride. She was a target. Daniel leaned closer, speaking with a voice calm and steady, promising her that they would survive. That Ghost Protocol was not just a program, it was a safeguard, a last measure designed for moments like this. Amelia tried to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. Her mind torn between love and betrayal, between faith and fear. She wondered if she was truly his partner in this fight or merely another piece on his board, moved where he commanded, without her knowledge. The transport screeched as it entered a vast chamber, the tunnel opening into a cavernous space filled with machinery and dim lights. Daniel slowed the craft, guiding it toward a platform as he explained that this was one of the oldest nodes of the network, a hub meant for emergency extraction. Amelia stepped out, her legs shaking her gown, dragging through oil stains and dust, her hands brushing against cold steel walls. She looked around at the empty platforms and realized this place had been waiting for them all along, like a stage set for a play she had never rehearsed. Suddenly, the sound of boots echoed again from the far tunnels, operatives flooding into the chamber, their weapons raised there, lasers cutting through the dark. Daniel pulled Amelia behind a stack of crates, drawing a weapon from his pack. His movements fluid, precise, the training of years shining in every motion. Amelia pressed against the cold metal, her breath caught between sobs and gasps. She could not reconcile the man before her, the man who had kissed her at the altar. With the soldier crouched in shadows, ready to kill, gunfire erupted, filling the chamber with sparks and smoke. Daniel returned fire, every shot calculated, every movement purposeful, his eyes sharp, his body a shield between Amelia and death. The operatives spread in formation, advancing with deadly precision, yet every step forward met with Daniel's counter, a trap, triggered a light, extinguished a path. Cut off. Amelia covered her ears, the roar of violence overwhelming her, until all she could feel was the pounding of her heart, screaming louder than the bullets. The chamber shook as an explosion tore through one of the side tunnels, dust raining. From the ceiling, the operatives momentarily disoriented, Daniel seized the chance. Pulling Amelia toward another hidden passage sealed with steel, he slammed his hand against the scanner, the door opening just enough for them to slip through behind. The chamber filled with chaos. Gunfire, screams, smoke, and flames sealing their path with violence they had escaped, but the war still hunted them through every shadow. The passage narrowed, the lights dimmer, the air colder. Amelia stumbled, her voice breaking, as she begged him to tell her everything, to stop hiding, to let her choose whether to follow him into this abyss. Daniel paused, his shoulders tense, his breath heavy. He turned his gaze upon her eyes, filled with both sorrow and fire. He whispered that the truth was heavier than she could imagine, that Ghost Protocol was more than survival. It was revelation, and that once she knew it, there would be no return to the life she once dreamed. Amelia froze, her tears falling, her body trembling as the weight of his words sank deep into her soul. She thought of her family above the guests who had scattered in terror, the chapel that once promised joy, now reduced to rubble. Her dream burned away by secrets she never asked to inherit yet, despite the pain. Despite the betrayal, she realized her feet still followed him. Her heart still tethered to his, as though some part of her already knew she could never escape the gravity of his world. And as they reached the end of the passage, the steel door before them hissed open, revealing a chamber unlike any they had seen before. Glowing screens, maps of the entire city, satellites tracking drones circling like hawks, soldiers waiting in silence as the door slid wide. Daniel turned to Amelia, his voice low and unyielding, whispering that the wedding was over. The mission had begun, and the soldiers who stood before them were not enemies, but allies, waiting to salute her name. The chamber beyond the steel door glowed with an eerie brilliance. Screens stretched across the walls, glowing maps of continents, shifting symbols, flashing codes that Amelia could not begin to understand. Men and women in tactical uniforms stood in rigid lines, their faces unreadable, their weapons slung at their sides as though awaiting a signal. Daniel stepped forward, pulling her gently with him, his expression harder than stone, yet his hand soft around hers. The silence in the room pressed against her ears like a storm waiting to break. Amelia trembled, her torn gown dragging across the cold floor, her eyes darting from the glowing maps to the soldiers who remained utterly still. None of them raised their weapons. None of them moved with aggression. Instead, as Daniel stopped in the center of the room, a ripple of motion passed through the soldiers, every one of them lifting their hands in salute, not to Daniel, but to her. Confusion rippled through her chest, her heart stuttering at the sight. She shook her head, whispering that it must be a mistake, but the weight in their eyes said otherwise. Daniel turned to her, his voice low, steady, carrying the gravity of years of secrets. He told her that Ghost Protocol was not built to protect him. It was built to protect her, that she was not a bystander dragged into his world, but the core around which it was constructed. Amelia staggered back, shaking her head, disbelief pouring from her lips. Yet Daniel continued, explaining that long before they met, she had been marked as vital by forces far greater than either of them. Her lineage, her bloodline, her existence tied to a vault of intelligence and access codes locked away in systems that only her identity could awaken. The words cut through her like blades. She wanted to scream that he was lying, that she was nothing more than a school teacher, nothing more than a woman who dreamed of love and weddings and simple joy. But the screens above her flickered alive, projecting her face, her name, her family tree stretching across decades. Her mother's life, Her father's records each line, connecting to files stamped, classified, and redacted. Amelia pressed her hands to her ears as if she could shut out the truth, but the images burned into her eyes. The soldiers lowered their salutes, stepping aside as a figure approached an older man with a scar running across his cheek. His uniform adorned with medals, his voice carrying the weight of command. He addressed her directly, calling her by name, stating that her life had been shielded under layers of falsehoods that Daniel had been assigned not to court her, but to guard her from the moment they met. The wedding had been both real and unreal. The vows heartfelt, but also the final trigger of Ghost Protocol meant to activate when danger drew too near. Amelia felt the floor tilt beneath her, every breath heavy with betrayal. She turned to Daniel, her tears hot and furious, demanding to know if every kiss, every word of love had been an assignment, a mission, a carefully crafted deception. Daniel reached for her, his eyes raw with emotion, whispering that his orders had been to guard her, yes, but his heart had betrayed those orders long ago when he fell in love with her, that his love was the only truth among all the lies. Amelia staggered, unable to believe yet, unable to let go of the fire in his eyes. The older commander gestured to the screens where red markers spread across the map, operatives closing in from every corner, the world shifting into war, the enemy moving faster than anticipated. Ghost Protocol had bought them time but not victory. The commander declared that Amelia was no longer a hidden civilian. She was the fulcrum of the mission, the only one who could access the final vault, a system buried beneath layers of encryption that would either end the conflict or consume the world. Daniel squeezed her hand, whispering that the choice was hers now. Her mind raced, torn between love and anger, between fear and destiny. She wanted to run back to the chapel, back to her family, back to the laughter and music. Yet she knew those doors were closed forever behind her. Bullets had sealed them. Fire had erased them, and the only path forward was into the abyss. Her body trembled, but her eyes sharpened as she asked the commander. What would happen if she refused his silence was answer enough. The enemy would seize her and the world would collapse into chaos. Amelia closed her eyes, tears falling as she whispered that she would choose. The soldiers moved quickly, guiding her to a console, a small platform rising from the floor glowing with a strange light. The commander explained that only her biometrics could open the system. Only her identity could trigger the sequence. Daniel stood at her side, his hand upon her shoulder, his voice soft, reminding her that no matter what came next, she was not alone. Amelia pressed her hand to the scanner, her pulse racing, her breath shallow. The machine hummed with energy codes streaming across the screens faster than her eyes could follow until the entire chamber shook with power. Above ground, the operatives hunting them paused as satellites shifted overhead, signals scrambling, systems failing their comms lines. Dead in an instant, the pursuers looked skyward. As drones fell lifeless from the sky, their engines silent, their lights extinguished, panic rippled through their ranks as the network they relied upon collapsed like glass, shattering beneath a hammer. Amelia did not see it, but she felt it. The weight of the world shifting because of her, the burden crushing yet undeniable. The commander nodded his approval, but before he could speak, another explosion tore through the far wall of the chamber. Concrete, crumbling steel, shrieking as enemy forces poured. In black-armored figures storming with relentless precision, Daniel drew his weapon, firing in bursts, his body moving like a storm shielding Amelia as soldiers on their side returned fire. The chamber erupted into chaos, bullets screaming, smoke filling the air. Amelia ducked behind the console, her body shaking, yet her hand never leaving the scanner, for the system still demanded her presence. The firefight raged, soldiers falling, shouts echoing, the enemy pressing forward. Daniel fought with fury, Every movement sharpened by desperation, the commander barked orders directing defenses, yet the tide pressed harder. Amelia screamed.